Hello. Hello, everyone. My name is Ida Cutler. I'm a bookseller at Women and Children First, one of the last remaining feminist bookstores in the United States. We're in Chicago, Illinois. I want to thank you all so much for being here tonight. I know a lot has happened in the last 24 hours. So I just want take a moment to say thank you for coming to this tonight. It's my honor to be hosting the virtual launch celebration for Laziness Does Not Exist by Dr. Devin Price. I read an advanced copy of this fall, and I got my hard copy, like many of you, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. The research in this book is validating and surprising. The personal anecdotes are shared with bravery and candor, and from cover to cover, it's a vital, approachable, and hopeful read. I imagine most of you at this event tonight are here because you are planning to read it. Good choice. For those of you who somehow find yourself here still on the fence, I'm going to assure you right now that it is worth it, and not just because I'm a bookseller and need to sell books. Reading this book, it feels like you're putting on a seatbelt as you're about to drive into this unknown 2021, and the lessons that Price has to offer will keep you safe. I'm going to now introduce the two authors who we have here with us tonight. So Dr. Devin Price is a social psychologist, writer, activist, and professor at Loyola University of Chicago School of Continuing and Professional Studies. Price's work has appeared in numerous publications such as Slate, The Rumpus, NPR, and HuffPost. They have also been featured on the front page of Medium numerous times. They are joined in conversation tonight by Christine Tate, author of Group, How One Therapist and a Circle of Strangers Saved My Life. In addition to this memoir, Tate has been published in the New York Times, the Washington Post, McSweeney's Internet Tendency, and elsewhere. Before we begin, I want to say a few housekeeping announcements. If you still have yet to order Laziness Does Not Exist or Group, or you need to order more copies for your friends and your family, or any other book in print that just comes into your mind at any point, you can do so anytime by going to womenandchildrenfirst.com or by clicking that little teal button that you see on your screen that says buy the book. We are currently offering curbside pickup at our store and also shipping, and you can learn about how to do that on our website. During the event, please drop a question by using the Ask a Question feature that's right below the Buy the Book button that I just mentioned. And you can go ahead and type in your questions at any point, but we will get to the questions at the end of the event. All right. Without further ado, I'm going to go away now. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Devin Price and Christine Tate.
All right. Thank you, Ida. Thank you so much for all of your help and support in the whole process of this book happening. I have to mention that Ida is someone who, when I was still figuring out what the cover of the book was going to be, we walked through Women and Children First, looking at book covers, thinking about what kind of vibe I wanted and the book to have, and just like all these bookseller things that you don't think about as an author necessarily until it's like time to make those decisions. So I don't know, Ida made it possible for me to actually conceive of this as like, oh, someday it's going to physically exist. So thank you so much, Ida, for everything you've done. Okay, so this is the book, Laziness Does Not Exist, and the book is really something that grew out of an essay that I wrote on Medium in 2018, also called Laziness Does Not Exist. And that essay was all about students that I had who reported just having a lot of like shame, feeling like they weren't working hard enough, and they were all adults working full-time jobs with kids and elder care responsibilities, and yet they still thought they weren't doing enough in life, and they had professors and teachers and parents sometimes who had made them think that they weren't enough. And so I wrote an essay about all of that and how there's just no winning in a game where you define your worth by your productivity, and how when we set out to do too much, we're always going to feel like we're not doing enough or barely doing anything. And so that kind of eventually became this little guy. So I'm going to read really briefly from the book before we dive into Christine and I talking and taking questions from people. And I decided to choose a section near the end because I think it's a little apt right now. And the section is "It's Not Your Job to Save the World" is the name of it. So we'll just dive right on in. Nearly every person I interviewed for the book mentioned feeling deeply anxious about the future of our world. Many said they feel guilty about not doing more to address the world's problems. Even people who've taken concrete steps to embrace rest and do less in their lives mentioned feeling remorse, that they weren't doing enough to fight climate change, racial injustice, the persecution of immigrants, and dozens of other problems. My friend Kim, whose experiences with homelessness I described in Chapter 1, knows this feeling very well. In years since being homeless, Kim has built a new life for themselves. They've gotten engaged, moved into a house in Wichita with their partner and daughter, and become a prominent activist. On Facebook, they run several online activist groups with a combined membership of over 150,000 people. The groups inform followers about things like homelessness, economic inequality, climate change, and dozens of other topics close to Kim's heart. They pour hours each week into keeping the groups active. In real life, Kim also does homeless outreach, giving people money and food and directing them to resources. Unfortunately, there's been another development in Kim's life in the past few years that threatens their ability to juggle these many responsibilities. After moving to Wichita, Kim developed Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, a rare and painful neuromuscular condition. The disease is debilitating, and it saps Kim's energy in massive ways. My husband does the lion's share of the housework because I'm fatigued by physical labor so quickly that it would never get done otherwise, Kim says. Sometimes I run a load of laundry or wash like 4 dishes, but then I have to lay down and rest. Kim's disability puts major limits on how much work they can get done, both as a parent and an activist. Running errands, going to doctor's appointments, picking their daughter up from school, each takes a significant physical toll, and sometimes Kim doesn't have the strength to do any of it. Kim and their husband are constantly burned out, and when things get especially busy, activism has to fall by the wayside. Last September, I compiled a list of about 24 climate-related reports and articles, dealing mostly with how climate change just disproportionately harms people in the global South, Indigenous people, and disabled people, Kim says. I intended to create a big social media post for each of these reports and post them during the climate strike in September. Unfortunately, Kim wasn't able to make these posts in time. Life got in the way. I had to get wedding invitations in the mail, and I felt guilty every minute I wasn't working on that, Kim says. Caleb and I got married over a year ago, and it's taken us this long to even plan an actual wedding. I finally had to get it done. So the climate strike passed by without my ever getting around to those posts. There are optimal times and days to post certain stories if you want to elicit a response, and I feel terrible when I miss those dates. When I asked Kim what steps they take to manage their burnout or reduce their workload, they didn't have much to offer. I don't know that I do anything to prevent burnout, they say. It's never not on the horizon. To some extent, having a neuromuscular condition forces me to rest. Sometimes, instead of feeling guilty about what I'm not getting done, I sleep all afternoon instead. Even though Kim clearly has tons of valid reasons to need a break from activism, they still feel guilty for not giving more time and energy to it. Climate change is an urgent, pressing issue, a literal fire that needs to be put out. It's hard to set reasonable work-life boundaries when matters seem that dire. If you care deeply about a variety of social issues, it's easy to feel that you must sacrifice your own well-being in order to save the world. When I spoke to therapist Kathy Labriola about this, she noted that this feeling of panicky urgency is nothing new. The thing that seems so striking to me is that at any given moment in the last 50 years, there are lots of people saying, oh my God, this is the most important issue ever in history, and we must sacrifice everything for this cause, she says. People said that exact same thing 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, about different issues. And then they got so burned out after a relatively short time that they just dropped out from totally doing anything. As much as we might want to devote our lives to solving the political problems that keep us up at night, intense, panic-fueled activism is rarely sustainable. No individual has the power to actually save the world through sheer hard work. It's both ridiculous and destructive to set such high expectations for ourselves. Instead, if we want to fight injustice or work to improve the world, we need to do so in a collaborative way that recognizes our unique strengths and needs. I spoke with several mental health professionals who regularly treat clients for activism fatigue, and their overall advice was this: prioritize causes that genuinely inspire you, set realistic goals for your activism, and work to accept that there are certain problems you cannot fix, no matter how hard you try. And another element of this chapter that I wanted to read is about that last point: grieve the things you cannot change. One of the mental health professionals I interviewed about this was Xochitl Sandoval, a counselor who works with the Chicago-based therapy group Practical Audacity. A queer transgender indigenous person, Xochitl knows very deeply what it's like to be impacted by injustice on a day-to-day basis. One way that Z deals with it is by giving lots of space for mourning and grief. I think we don't know how to grieve as a society, Z says. I think a lot of the conversation about activist burnout is actually about grieving, about being really able and willing to just sit in this space of this is fucking awful, and there might not be anything I can do to solve this. Xochitl shares with me that Z often mourns the harm that's already been done to the planet due to industrialization and climate change. Though society can take steps to reduce carbon emissions and slow the damage that's occurring, there's some harm that can never be undone. The Amazon is burning. So many animals have gone extinct because of climate change, Z says. And there's always, I think, this natural impulse to make sense of all of it. Like, what are the ways you can take action? Like, can you sign some petitions? Can you commit to not using plastic? And we can talk about those steps. But let's start with the grief. Let's start with the fact that even if I cut all plastic out of my life, that doesn't take away all of the plastic in the ocean. The American Psychological Association issued a massive report on climate grief for the first time in 2017, with chapters detailing about how fear of the planet's future is linked with depression and anxiety among children and adults alike. A survey from Yale conducted in 2018 found that 62% of people say they're worried about climate change, up from about 30% back in 2015. So Xochitl and their clients are far from alone in feeling this despair. Instead of trying to ignore these hard feelings or to solve them, Xochitl recommends honoring them. It may sound very demotivating to sit and mourn losses like this, but feelings of grief can't just be brushed away. When we treat social problems as emergencies that we must fix urgently, we delude ourselves into thinking we can control them if we would only work hard enough. Realistically, though, that just isn't the case. I can fight and fight to make the world more just, but if my goal is fixing a decades or centuries old problem, I'm destined to fail and burn out. Sometimes the best way to deal with those feelings of panic and guilt is to really let them wash over us for a moment and really accept that we're not fully in control or fully responsible for it. This can be an immensely sad experience, but it can also be liberating. When we mourn the losses that cannot ever be brought back, we come to accept the reality we're living in. And this allows us to address problems realistically and sustainably. So a bit of a bummer note, but I think it's been a heavy couple of days. And I think, I don't know, that interview with Xochitl really has stayed with me. So I wanted to share that.
I'm so grateful, Devin, that you're here, that you wrote this book, and that you read those exact pieces. And I want to say first, congratulations on your exquisite book. What a gift! What a gift to the world. And I have all these questions I want to ask you, but I want to just really respond to what you just said. And what really stands out for me in what you just read as an extraordinary feature of your book is you have so much research and so many anecdotes in your book, and you did such an exquisite job that I have to think was intentional of getting voices of people that are traditionally not heard of from in social sciences. Like, you didn't just poll a bunch of white guys to talk about the issue. And you at every turn, I saw you talking about, well, what does social media stress mean to a trans person, a queer person, a woman of color? And especially my favorite example of that is when you were talking about labor, and we can get into that, and about like women should or women could opt not to do that second shift of labor at home. But what does it mean for a trans woman to step away from labor and then get the accusation you're acting like a man? Like, you just took on all that complexity, which was so comforting and so It was so refreshing. And I just want to know, can you talk a little bit about those conscious choices to get voices in your work that aren't always represented?
Yeah, yeah. For me, a lot of it came very easily because, so there's two kind of sets of interviews in the book. Interviews of people who are really burned out, and then kind of mental health professionals. And, a lot of the people that I spoke to were in my networks that I already kind of knew. And it's not true that every trans person in Chicago knows each other, but we're all in the same Facebook groups or something. Like, so in one way, it was very easy for me to kind of just say, when I was starting out, like, well, why not just act like we're a normal class of person and just center us to the point where we're the majority of people in this group, in this book. And it's not even like really remarked upon. So that was something that was really important to me. And also because self-help and psychology are such white fields, and, there's still so much, I could have done it so much better. Like, looking back on the book, I still think I should have interviewed way more like Black female therapists. I should have done like a lot, should have taken it further than I did, or put more effort into it, because it is because you have to be intentional when you're looking at psychology and the mental health field to really push against that tide, because systemically it just normalizes white mental health and white ways of experiencing emotions and things like that. So yeah, that was something that was really important to me. There's already books that talk about burnout and, like you said, the second shift and things like that, but they always seem to forget the fact that kind of the standard white feminist approach to it isn't going to apply to every man of color at work who's also asked to take on a lot of emotional labor, or every person with a disability, regardless of gender, who also is expected to kind of put on a smile and not be bitter or angry or whatever. So yeah. And also, this book ultimately is about like the legacy of white supremacy. That's really where the pressure to overwork comes from. So it just seemed really essential to do right by that.
Yeah, I think you did a really amazing job, and I'm so grateful for that. The other question I have, which is somewhat related, is there's moments in the story where you talk about your own experience with burnout and the own ways in which your body carried the toll of this outrunning laziness. And I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about like your own experience and your own bodily uh, like the toll that it took on your body, and how that informed your work, or even the question of the research.
Yeah. And I know this is something that you can relate to in your own work too. This is just, and writing and experiences of these things. There's just a way that your body kind of breaks down to let you know that you are not doing things right. You're not listening to your needs. And that was one of the major things that put me on the path to eventually writing this book, is that when I finished my PhD, I had been just kind of pushing myself my whole life, and really, putting a lot of stock in how I was doing impressive things, particularly young. And so I was like, oh, I want to finish my PhD super young. And then I finish it and I immediately get this weird fever every single night from February until November, and a heart murmur and anemia and all of these problems that I couldn't even figure out. Like, there wasn't any diagnosable, condition that easily like explained it. And then I just had to like rest and actually eat and stop trying to exercise while I was sick and stop trying to work while I was sick. And it took me that many months to like figure that out and get past the denial and actually do that. And then that was when I started kind of noticing that my students had a lot of the same problems, that my colleagues had a lot of the same problems, that, that this was a really endemic, deeply entrenched cultural issue. And then, in the book, it's so funny. Like, I didn't set out seeking to find people who had these parallel experiences, but I knew like so many people come up in the book who they were like, I was working 80-hour work weeks and then I was vomiting blood. And it's like, what are we all, how many of us are crawling on the floor vomiting blood? Like, what the hell? So yeah, it's terrifying how pervasive it is.
Well, one of the things, like, since reading your book, so I read your book in November, and I was so enlightened by it that I thought, if I'm going to read this book and take this seriously, then I can't just keep wearing a Fitbit and just chugging along. And I exercise, and while I'm exercising, I'm reading something for work, right? I'm like, sweat is dripping on my iPhone and I'm trying to read. I'm like, oh my God, like I am totally on a one-way road to burnout. And what I found, and I'm wondering if you had this experience or if you could speak to this, because it sort of relates to the passage you read, when I pull back, even just like stop with the fitness trackers and let go of, I used to tally down every day. I have these little tick marks, like how many hours did I do my creative writing? And it was never enough. If I got to 2 hours, I wanted 3. If I got to 3, I wanted 4. And it was never, ever, ever enough. And when I pull back, I feel a sense of grief. I feel a sense, there's not euphoria at first. I mean, later it came, but like there's a lot of feelings that I think my busyness keeps at bay. And I'm wondering if you found that, or if you've had a personal experience. There's some payoff for those of us who are tied into busyness that's even beyond like patriarchy, capitalism, supremacy. Those things are there, but what about the feelings that keep us, that we're outrunning something?
Oh God, yeah. So let me first ask this. Did you, when the pandemic started, did you like immediately be like, oh, were you like start all these projects or like work my way out of it? Were you someone who had that?
Oh my God, no, I had way less time. My kids are now doing school next to me while I'm trying to work, and my husband's working, and all like I was like frozen in grief about my lack of space and freedom, that if I saw anything about sourdough bread, I would just scroll on past. Like, no, I was so stabby about it. So I did not think I was going to write Hamlet I was like, I hope I don't end up in the county jail.
That's good. Yeah, I don't want to hear about the fluffy coffee. Yeah, I was the opposite a little bit. I was on the editing stage for this book, and then I was like, oh, I need to help all these teachers who are transitioning to teaching online. I need to do all this stuff. I need to I'm going to finally have enough time to lift weights as much as I wish that I would. I was just completely trying to outrun the grief, exactly as you were saying. And I think it is, if you don't have emotional self-regulation skills, if you weren't brought up knowing that it's okay to feel sad and it's okay to cry and have a temper tantrum, I think it's really easy to reach for that stuff, in addition to all the other systemic pressures. So that's the most recent one that comes to mind. For months, I was just, lots of activism, lots of volunteering, lots of teaching people, lots of writing, editing. And then I reached kind of a breaking point in this past summer where I had a few days where I was just like, okay, I need to just sit on the floor and cry, and actually did that. And it was I'm still someone, and I do talk about this in the book, and I'm not fully over it. It's like, oh, I cried, how embarrassing, how annoying, oh my God, my partner's, since we're stuck home together, he's going to actually see how much I'm just laying on the floor being sad for a couple of days. But that was so cathartic. I had to do it. It's normal and healthy to be traumatized right now. And yeah, but I took months to even let myself do that in the midst of a pandemic.
Yeah, what a crash course. Now one of the questions that I'm seeing in the queue. Let's back up for a second. Your book is called Laziness Does Not Exist. So for anybody who hasn't had the pleasure of reading it yet, and they've hopefully ordered it from Women and Children's First, can you just give us what's the elevator pitch? What do you mean it doesn't exist? We all think we know lazy people, right? So what's your premise about laziness, and what are you arguing? What's the premise of your book?
Sure. Yeah. So the basic premise of it, and if you want to take it for a test drive, there's a Laziness Does Not Exist essay that you can read first to kind of see, if you like what I'm putting down. But basically, people don't choose to fail or disappoint. It doesn't really make sense that if someone cares about a goal, but they're not meeting it, that is because of some failure within them. Because why would someone choose to not have motivation to do something they care about doing? So if someone looks like they're not doing anything, if they're lazy, if it seems like they don't have the drive that it takes to get something done, clearly what's actually going on is that they have barriers that are getting in their way that either we can't see or that we're refusing to accept as legitimate. So that can be anything from depression, anxiety, trauma, coping with white supremacy and transphobia, having to, work a full-time job and take on a full course load. I think most people who get branded lazy are actually juggling dozens of these things, actually, but to an external viewer, we can easily just disregard all of that because we don't see it and just call it laziness. And so, yeah, so the idea that there's some moral failing inside of people that makes them not do something, it doesn't really make sense. All there are people who need more support, who are being asked to do too much.
Sure. And can you just talk a little bit? You do such a great job in the book of taking big concepts like white supremacy and capitalism and tying them into this. Can you give us just a brush of how those systemic pressures have created the specter of laziness that have got us all on the treadmill just nonstop?
Yeah, absolutely. So when the United States was first, colonizing this continent, the Puritans came over and they had a ideology that was specifically, if you worked hard, that was a sign you were blessed. It wasn't necessarily that you worked your way into heaven. It was just that people who had a drive to work hard had been selected by God to be that way. And people who didn't work hard, that was a sign that they were damned. So they kind of introduced the kind of colonizing United States to this idea that work is a sign that you are moral and not having drive is a sign that you are broken and a failure. As enslavement became a major cornerstone of the US economy as it was developing, you have this group of people who are being forced to work and generate productivity when they have nothing to gain from it. And so that version of Christianity was really heavily pushed on enslaved people, this idea that you're not free on this earth, but work will kind of set you free. And then after abolition, and that ideology was also pushed on poor white laborers, indentured servants, indigenous people in United States boarding schools, really anyone whose kind of labor was being exploited, right? And then after abolition, one very potent way politically to keep kind of poor white laborers from joining forces with poor black laborers and kind of rising up against their kind of shared exploitation was to convince white people that, oh no, you can't trust these recently freed people. They're lazy. You can't trust them. They've never had a drive. They're just trying to like exploit the system. And unfortunately, that same message has basically been pushed throughout the American political system and elsewhere since, the 1860s. And it's resurged and taken on new flavors over time. So for example, in the 80s, Reagan really pushed the idea of the stereotype of the lazy welfare queen, right? This idea that, no, you don't need to vote in support of giving single working mothers social welfare because they're actually just lazy. And so laziness has always been about, in American history, about stereotypes about blackness, stereotypes about fatness, stereotypes about disability. And so, we've really moralized people's oppression and tried to convince people that, oh, you don't have to worry about these systemic injustices. If you just worked hard, you wouldn't be in that position. And that is still very much with us today.
Yeah, it seems like laziness is a way of othering, and it also obscures. This is how I understood some of your research, was that it obscures the ways in which we're actually failing people by not giving them the supports they need, be it through physical supports or financial. And we console ourselves by saying, well, they're just lazy. It's not that we are failing them. And that's there's a lot of uncomfortable things to look at in this book that are really, really helpful. But also there's a lot of empowerment too in this book. And I was wondering if you could talk just a little bit about what an individual can do. What can an individual do who's trapped? I'm in X job. I work 45 hours a week. Well, no, let's say more than that. that would be great, right? I work 60, 70. And at some point, down the hall, there's people working 80. So my 70 feels paltry. And my health is, I can still get away with it. There's some fraying at the margins. But what are some of the strategies for someone who's beginning to confront their own laziness lie and want to work towards their own liberation? What do you recommend?
Yeah. Oh gosh. There's so much to it, and of course, it is ultimately, I think, always for people going to be kind of a two-pronged solution of both doing what you can to get yourself free, and then fighting to kind of get rid of some of these structures so that everyone has the freedom to kind of attain work-life balance or whatever that means. So some of it is the internal work of values clarification. There's an exercise for that in the book of really identifying who do I want to be, what do I want my life to look like, and what are the things currently that are taking up a lot of time in my life simply because other people think I should be doing them. And how can I get rid of those shoulds so that I can focus on the things that will be both sustaining to me in the literal sense of getting enough money to survive, because unfortunately people have to make that rational calculation, and also what's enriching and nourishing to me on a emotional and psychological level. In the workplace, it can mean unionizing. It can mean documenting repeated problems with your fellow employees so that you can really build a track record of showing, it's not that I'm lazy and it's not that my coworker's lazy either, but that there's work that's not being distributed to enough people. And that can be a really hard fight. So I don't want to downplay how difficult that is in a lot of organizations. I also think people on an individual level should do sneaky things too, as much as they can. Like, don't worry about time theft. Like, any way you can scam your employer, please do. So I have a friend who, because of the pandemic, they're working from home. Their computer has mouse tracking software. They have to have their computer active all 8 hours of the day. And they are living at home with their family and siblings who are in school. They have to go to the bathroom. They have a life, and they'll get docked pay if they take a break. So what they did was they made an iPad like screensaver that's like animating, and then they put their mouse on the iPad so that it's constantly tripping the mouse so that they always look active. And so that'll give them sometimes 20 minutes to go help their little brother with his homework or whatever. I'm a big fan of scheduling ghost meetings in Outlook. If you have a job where Outlook calendars are important, schedule a meeting with yourself, either for just some decompression time or to like I'll block out time, like writing time in the morning, or I'll block out like time to catch up on grading, because as educators, so often we end up having to steal the time to do that in the middle of the night. And that's not right. It's part of our job. It should be part of our workday. So I think it's some combination, especially in the workplace, of lie, cheat, and steal as much as you can, because that's what they're doing to you. And in so many cases. And in addition to kind of taking care of yourself, how can you take care of other people? How can you fight so that you're all treated more fairly? That's a bigger question. That's a long fight, but I think it's essential too.
I could not agree more. And at my organization, I'm in law, so every organization I've ever worked in, there's a real dividing, like to try to keep everybody on the same level from having knowledge. And I just think that's how we stay stuck. And as soon as I started finding out, like sharing productivity numbers with my colleagues, I realized how much more I was doing than the men in the office. And so I didn't do anything right away, but then when I presented it to my supervisor, when it was time I needed help, and my supervisor was sort of like, do you really need help? And I was like, listen, I know what X, Y, and Z do, and I know what I do. But that takes a lot of courage, like speaking up in a workplace. And so I like that you have fronted that's something that needs to be done carefully. And to the extent, no wonder that there's so much anti-union sentiment. It's because the more we all know about each other, the more we're banding together, the more we can fight the system that keeps us in a place where we're isolated in our silos, thinking, well, I'm sure I'm doing the least of everyone on the team. And it's not true. It's just not true.
Yeah.
One of the things I love you talking about, which seems to be so important, like today, like yesterday, I must have gotten 10 emails or texts between yesterday and today. I didn't do anything. I was parked in front of the news. I was doom scrolling, right? And my husband, like, he and I had not slept well the night before. He's up just listening to on the floor of the house, and I'm just Can you just talk about boundaries? Because I feel what I like about your book is that you offer suggestions, whereas I feel like there's this sort of throw up our hands, there's nothing we can do, technology's smarter than us, those algorithms are gonna get us, there's nothing you can do. And you make the point that we can take some of this back. We can take our time back and our space and our headspace back. And what are some things that you recommend for those of us who feel like, well, if there's a coup going on, I should probably read everything about the coup today? Like, how do you talk about that in terms of letting go of the laziness lie?
Yeah. So I guess the first thing I want to say is that like there's these two forces that are in tension there. The pressure to I need to be self-educated, I need to be a responsible citizen, I need to have all this information, and then also the equally noxious idea that I should be working while I'm not sure if there's going to be a world tomorrow that looks anything like the world I've been living in. So I think the first thing I do want to say about that is just like honoring how like rational it is to have that impulse, and that sometimes the kind of natural and healthy thing to do is to say, I'm not getting any work done today. That's normal. And of course, I'm inhabiting the reality that I'm currently in. And like accepting reality as it is sometimes means accepting how horrible it is and how uncertain it is. And I think that can help with the information overload element too, because having access to smartphones makes people feel more powerful, and losing their cell phone, not having access to it, makes people like feel less powerful. Knowledge and information we think is going to give us power, but all of that uncertainty and having more than we can actually process or reflect on actually just leaves us agitated and without any sense of context. And it really erodes our ability to discern a credible idea from one that makes no sense. And we can see all of the ramifications of that politically. So finding ways, and I think it does vary for each person, what are the issues that are absolutely most essential for me, and how can I put time limits on when I check in on them? And some people that's checking the news once a week. Some people that's like having a conversation with a news wonk friend once a week who gives them the download. I think that's fine. Some people it's more like I delete Twitter every night before I go to bed, or I don't read the news while I'm in bed. But I think we do end up having to have some kind of like Sisyphean, tying us to, or Odyssean, tying ourselves to the mast kind of moment, because otherwise advertisers benefit from us being nervous and refreshing all of the time. So learning how those systems and algorithms work so that we can stop being as manipulated by them is really important. And I think also not moralizing your needs. That's like what this book ultimately is all about. You're not a bad person if you didn't follow this stuff as it was happening on Twitter, or if you only followed it for a little bit. That isn't you necessarily like having kind of a privilege removed from things. It's about having kind of a sustainable relationship to the world and thinking about like, who can I help in my community? What can I do to take care of myself, my family, the people I love, the people most marginalized in my neighborhood, in ways that I can really see the fruits of my work? That is so much better than just constantly having junk data thrown at you. And we know psychologically that getting a ton of negative political information makes people less likely to take political action, makes them less likely to vote, makes them less likely to be activists. So it's not a bad thing to unplug. It's giving yourself the space to think about, who can I actually help? What can I put meaningful effort into in a sustainable way?
That's really great. And I feel like your book too has rings the bell of boundaries in so many areas for obvious reasons. And I think one of them is implicit, that we get to, we don't have to suck up all the shame just because some people think it's shameful not to watch the video of the horrible police brutality, that's a privileged position. But at the end of the day, I have to answer to my own mental health, my own limitations, and think of the long game and all of the things I want to do in my life. So if it's not good for me to watch a video or engage for a day or for one event, that I don't have to take on shame for that. And some people are asking questions. I want to be sure we get to them. One of them is, let's see, there was a question about do you have advice for any autistic folks or people who have processed or feel emotions less typically, and they struggle with executive functioning? How do you what advice do you have for them in terms of working to build a practice of sitting with and feeling emotions regularly without being super overwhelmed by them?
Oh God, my story of my life, struggle of my life. So the first thing I would say is so executive functioning. What is that? Executive functioning, just for anybody who doesn't know, because I know not everyone here is like in the autism neurodiversity world. Executive functioning is the set of mental skills that it takes to really take any task and kind of break it down and actually get it done. So even something as simple as like unloading the dishwasher is actually a series of tasks that you do, a series of physical movements, and kind of breaking it down and making sense of it is something that actually takes a lot of cognitive energy. And if you're depressed or have ADHD or are autistic, you might not always consistently have the ability to go through those things. So there's someone on Instagram, a writer, Neuroemergent Insurgent, who talks a lot about something called spiral time that I really love. And it's kind of questioning the idea that some people are bad at executive functioning, that maybe just different people experience time and feelings and living in the world in different ways. So I would really check if you are dealing with executive functioning stuff, or you feel like you're not functioning correctly by society's terms in those things, I would check out her writing on spiral time, because it's this idea about how there is a time for everything, and if it's important in your life, it will come around, and that it doesn't have to follow kind of a traditional kind of neurotypical pace. Another person also on Instagram, NeuroXCore, talks about inertia instead of executive functioning, this idea that sometimes you just need to be still and you don't have enough energy to kind of initiate something, and that's okay. And I think since this person also asked kind of about the emotional piece, I think for a lot of neurodiverse people, we just don't get the same physical cues that tell us we're feeling emotions. We don't notice them as readily as neurotypical people, or maybe it's just we've kind of been taught the wrong toolkits because we've been given the tools for the neurotypical standard person. So we don't know which parts of our bodies to kind of listen to. So I think, for me, it does come back to time and executive functioning, because it just takes me so long to figure out how I feel about something. Sometimes it takes me a few years to realize, like, oh, wait, that situation was bad. Or like, oh, I was really not doing something good for myself there. Or that person was abusive, or whatever the case may be. Or like, even just sometimes it takes me a week to realize I was sad about something. And so finding space to like really like not have an urgent answer for why you're feeling something, or realizing that even if you, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good example, realize that you were upset about something someone said to you, but it takes you like a week to figure it out, realizing that that's not you emotionally processing too late, and that you can still go to that person and say like, hey, this was not okay. Or, you don't have to communicate in real time. You can talk about hard things via text or whatever. So this is a very messy answer about following these things by like assuming that you're like broken, and kind of learning how it is that you do work, and knowing that like a lot of times these things are way slower than we're led to believe they're supposed to be.
Yes. And I want to ask, this is a related question. My previous question was a blending of two, and I just want to be sure that this question asker gets their due. So the commenter said, I really resonated with what you read about making space to sit with emotions like grief. Do you have any advice for autistic folks, people with alexithymia, people who process and feel emotions less typically, regarding working to build a practice of sitting with and feeling emotions regularly without getting super overwhelmed?
Oh yeah. So one thing that I do talk about in the book is reflective writing exercises. So that's this therapeutic method where you just basically set aside 20 minutes, like 3 times a week. It can vary kind of as you get more used to it, but that's kind of where people start, where you just pick a source of emotional upheaval in your life, and you just write about it as sloppily as possible. You don't stop writing about it. It's not supposed to be a beautiful essay. You just like get the words out, get the feelings out for 20 minutes. And then you stop and you like throw that shit out. Like, it's not about creating art. It's about just kind of, not exactly catharsis, but like really sitting in your feelings. For me, that worked really well because I am someone who is like, everything goes through the verbal processing kind of loop. Like I have to be able to name it, to be able to understand it. But I think maybe for people who aren't necessarily as verbal or more physical, then it might mean like identifying what ways you experience emotions physically that are different from kind of the norms you've been taught to, believe in. It's like a security guard in here. Hold on a second. Hello? Hi. So I think it kind of is going to vary from person to person and from norm to norm, that you're kind of unlearning about ways in which your emotional processing is functional or dysfunctional. But for me, that was one that, as a neurodiverse person, really, really helped. Was just, I'm going to set aside time where I actually am supposed to be feeling my feelings, because that idea that you can just trust your gut is something that neurotypical people get taught they can do, and we don't all work like that. A lot of us have kind of been gaslit by the world for a really long time, basically.
Yeah. This is something I'd be interested to hear what you have to say. The person asking the question says that they left the tech industry a few years ago where the following attitude was just rampant. And the attitude is, oh no, you can't be lazy or you'll be bad or inferior. And the question is, what are your thoughts on gently planting seeds or redirecting people in our lives who are powerfully carrying that message of don't be lazy? What can we do in those relationships?
Yeah, it's hard. I think kind of giving people like little seeds of curiosity can really help, like, or modeling curiosity. So this is something I've sometimes done with coworkers when I hear them kind of like complaining about a student that like they're sure the student is lying, for example, about something. And like I don't say this to like demean anyone that I work with. Like it's, every teacher goes through that moment of like, oh, this student has got to be lying to me about this thing they're going through. So kind of modeling for them that like, well, I wonder if it was this, or maybe it was that, or like if someone's just kind of saying a very obvious kind of knee-jerk thing that that's kind of society talking through them, right? They're like, don't give this homeless person money because they're just going to spend it on drugs kind of thing, that kind of platitude. If you can just kind of model, because someone's not a bad person if they've internalized that stuff. Like we all learn that stuff. So just kind of modeling, noticing that, and then questioning it. So, oh, well, even if they did buy drugs, like, why might they need drugs in this situation? Like, they must be in a lot of pain, just kind of a slight, like, reflection on let's practice thinking about the structure around the person. That's something that's the way that I usually go, because if you don't want to put people on the defensive. You don't want to make people feel like they're a bad person, because then that doesn't open up hearts and minds, and they aren't a bad person for having this stuff. So that's also good practice for me, right? Because I am a judgmental person. I'm like frenetic and impatient. I do this stuff too. So like modeling it and practicing it comes down to a lot of times just disrupting that feedback loop of immediately assuming the worst. Like, oh, this job must be really hard, or like, what this person's dealing with must be really difficult. And I know I can't even imagine what everything is that the person's going through. And I think that kind of reflection applies to almost every situation in person, really.
Yeah, that's amazing. That sort of sense of being open and curious instead of slotting people into narratives without any context or curiosity seems like a portal into a new way of being. Alyssa has a question too. We've been talking about school and work-related commitments. Can you speak about some of the social stuff? I know you talk about it in your book, but like how the notion of laziness bleeds into our family and our intimate relationships, friendly, romantic, etc. Can you talk about what that looks like, how that gets expressed, and some of the strategies for finding a way out?
Yeah, a lot of us do not have good boundaries, or even a sense of like a right to boundaries when it comes to other people. This kind of just sense of like, if someone that I care about is in need, that's so distressing that it's my problem to solve. So I think some of the tools that are in the book are about kind of just asking for oneself, like, does this person need help? Did they ask for my help? like, am I the right person to help? And those just kind of taking a minute to like disrupt that knee jerk, I need to help the person, I need to save them thing can often be enough to realize, oh, actually, it's my own distress tolerance that was kind of the problem here. Like, I was upset that this person was upset, and I was trying to like control their emotions by fixing the problem, and they didn't even ask me for anything. That can be really helpful. That helps the other person too. And then when it comes to someone where they are making intentionally too many demands of you, they're communicating to you that they want you to do XYZ thing. One therapist that I spoke to for the book, Kathy Libriola, again, talks about kind of putting people on like a slow off ramp to kind of detaching. It takes a while to teach people new patterns. I think especially if it's like a family member or a friend you've had for a really long time, they have certain expectations that you have probably reinforced because you've met their demands for a long time. So letting them know, and again, if you need to lie and say you're really busy with work, I mean, it's probably true anyway, but like you can use our workaholic culture to help enforce your boundaries for you and say, hey, I'm really going through a lot at work right now, or hey, I'm going through a lot with my relationship or whatever it is. And so I won't be able to be available to you as often. I can only talk, every other week, or I won't be able to run errands for you or whatever it is, so that they know that changes are going to come. And then also being willing to be a broken record and know that ultimately, and this is so hard to actually put into practice, but like that your boundaries are about what you do when they're crossed, not about how the other person feels. So that means sometimes for me, I'll really just say like, I'm going to disappoint somebody this week. Like, who can I let down? And then if somebody sends me an email that has language that's like, can I count on you to do this? That's when I know I've found my person for the week to do the thing. Like if I notice manipulative language, that's when I like go for it. So those are the things that I often recommend for that stuff.
One of my favorite parts of the book is around this discussion, and you talk about, or maybe one of the researchers talked about, advising someone who's really enmeshed in a relationship where they're like I always call these people vampires, right? And I've certainly opened up my veins to the vampires, but now I want to slowly get my blood back. And one of the tips was to start with little disappointments. Like if you're not willing to say, we're not coming for Christmas this year, but if you'd be willing to say, I can't talk tonight, or just like build the muscle slowly instead of like black and white thinking and go whole hog. It made me think of like the grace of incremental steps and little by little getting where we need to be instead of just shooting for the target. Here's another question I want to be sure we get to. Anna said, I'd like to hear Dr. Price talk a little bit about the morality of debt and how that impacts work culture.
Oh gosh. So first of all, you should read Debt, the First 5,000 Years by David Graeber, because that book is all about how our whole concept of debt is like this very like Christian owing something to your government or owing something to society, and how existing in a state of debt is a state of not feeling fully connected to the world. So in that book, he talks about how anytime we approach a problem from the logic of debt, we're assuming that we're not enough, we don't have innate value, and that we have to overcome and kind of earn our right to exist. And it also divorces us from nature and from society, when really you can't actually owe anything to, for example, your parents. You are of your parents, you are of society, you are a part of it. And you are a part of nature. It doesn't make sense to say that like a tree owes another tree something, right? It's illogical. And so to really disrupt the idea of debt is to disrupt how we talk about human worth in society. That really, as long as we treat people as if they have some big hole that they need to fill up before they can really exist in a kind of legal free state, we're robbing people of liberty and their humanity. And so we have to kind of really resist that. And it's just another tool of kind of dehumanizing people and equating them to their productivity. Yeah.
Can you say the title of that debt book one more time?
Yeah, it's Debt, the First 5,000 Years by David Graeber.
Nice. What would you say to someone who is self-comparing? i.e., I was so much more productive 5 years ago or something like that?
Ooh, I think grief may come in here. That it sucks, but I think sometimes we have to realize that to be your like most healthy kind of sustainable self, that means leaving behind some of the ways that you were hurting yourself in the past, or acknowledging that you're aging and that your body will change, your mind will change. There's a lot, I'm 32, which is like, as my therapist used to say, still relatively young. Which is like, okay, great, thanks. And even at this stage, like bodies change. One of the people that minds change. One of the people that I talked to for the book, Kim, runs one of the Facebook groups that they run is called Change Like the Moon, accept everybody for every phase. And it's this idea that you change, you develop. Development is something that doesn't end after you become an adult. And a lot of those changes are things that happen to help preserve our lives and our health. So even something like how our muscle tone goes down as we get older, that is making our bodies require fewer calories in order to stay alive. And that can actually that's our bodies trying to protect our longevity. Our minds aren't always going to be super fast. Like I've been playing a lot of Call of Duty lately, and I'm never going to have the reaction time necessary to be like a no scope, kill someone really well in that game. And that's just a natural consequence of development. And so it's okay to kind of yeah, it's disappointing to have changes and losses, but a lot of times we were beating ourselves up way too hard when we were young. We were having all of that vitality vampirized out of us. And it's okay to actually see our slowing down as a sign that we're stepping more into a life that's better for us and that's more connected and slower and more sustainable for us and for the environment, which is hard. It's hard to really believe that because we live in such an ageist society, but you become a better person in all kinds of ways, and that does not mean becoming a more productive person, hardly ever.
Oh my God. Yes. Thank you. That's so beautiful. It's 7:58. In case anybody listening, if you haven't ordered the book, you can order it from Women and Children First. There's a green button. Laziness does not exist. We have one more great question, which I think is a great one to close out. Jennifer's asking, what would you like to see as the future of the term laziness? Should it be a shift to a reclaimed shorthand for boundary setting and used in a positive manner, or should we ban it? What do we do with this word laziness?
Oh, yeah. We went back and forth with the book, even whether to call it like in defense of laziness versus laziness does not exist. Because laziness can be a neutral thing, right? Like lazy Sunday is a great term, languid. Yeah. So I don't believe in really banning words with the exceptions of obviously hateful slurs or something like that. I think questioning why we're using a term is always going to lead to a way more fruitful discussion. So I think it would be great if we could get to the point where lazy just means I feel tired or I need some languidness in my life. I can tell that I'm supposed to be doing something other than working right now, and seeing that just as an emotion that is part of our body and mind's warning system, and that those feelings are our friends and they're trying to protect us.
What do you think about the prospect of taking laziness and reclaiming it as a celebratory? I mean, that's sort of what you just said, along the lines of what the queer community did with queer, and take the slur and put the magic sauce on it and own it and celebrate it. Do you think is that sort of what you're saying, or is that going too far?
I think we can go that way. I don't want it to get commodified, like self-care becomes just another thing to sell, But I think if we could kind of see it as an emotion and a desire, like hunger, right? Like hunger isn't bad, but if you have an eating disorder, you have to learn to stop questioning it and just go oh, thanks, friend, I'm going to eat. And I think we can do the same thing with laziness, that when we feel lazy, that means we're doing too much, or we need a break, or we need to reorient our whole lives sometimes. And we can see that as neutral and really useful data for us.
That's amazing. Your book is amazing. You are amazing. One of the comments is, Dr. Price is brilliant. And I think everyone here tonight can agree with that. And everyone who reads your book, it's literally such a gift to everyone. And I can't wait to see more conversations about this and more recognition of the toxicity that we just don't have. We have choices and we don't have to participate in that. And we certainly don't, for those of us in positions of authority over students or employees and in our family relationships, we don't have to keep this going. Like we can stop. So thank you for coming, everybody. And I think Ida's gonna give us some more information and send us on our way.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you both for being here. Thank you everyone who watched tonight. If this was live, we would all have like a cake with like the cover of this book just like on it, because book cakes are a thing that Dinkle's Bakery makes. So I'm ordering the cake personally, but maybe you all can have a sweet treat and at the same time, and it'll be just like it. Thank you so much again for this discussion. Thank you for everyone who tuned in. If you haven't bought the book yet, then hit that teal button. Events are a big core of what we do here at Women and Children First. We've still managed to keep them going despite the pandemic. And we have one coming up that is going to be very cool on the 14th. We have Maria Hinojosa, Koa Beck, Deborah Douglas, Alicia Elliott, and Michelle Weldon on a panel. The panel is titled Our Words, Ourselves. These are all amazing women memoir writers writing about various topics, and they're all going to talk to each other. And I'm like, whoa, like they're all from different places. So I'm really excited about that. I hope you all come to that, check that out. You can check out more on our event on our website. Other than that, thank you all so much for coming out. Stay safe. Take care of yourselves. Have a good night.
Night, everyone. Thank you for doing this, Ida and Chris.